I looked down at the tiny sleeping face of my son, and for a split second, the world felt perfect. But then, the weight of the secret I'm carrying settled back into my chest, heavy and suffocating. How do you tell a child that they are the absolute light of your life, but the way they came into this world was the darkest moment of yours? Right now, my friends are calling me a monster. They're telling me that every father has a right to know his child. But they don't know the truth. They don't know that my son's father is a man who stole my innocence while I was fast asleep. And they don't know that if I let him in, I'm not just sharing my son. I'm inviting a predator back into our lives. I'm standing at a crossroads where I have to choose between a right and a truth, and I honestly don't know if I can survive the fallout of either. They say you never forget the moment your life changes forever. For some people, it's a graduation or a wedding. For me, it was a random Tuesday night when I was 17 years old. Back then, I felt like I was on top of the world. I wasn't your typical teenager. While my peers were worrying about prom dresses and who was dating whom, I was grinding. I've been working since I was 12 years old. It started with making jewelry and selling it at flea markets, and by 17, I was working 2 jobs, saving every penny to finally get my own place. I had graduated high school early. I was a youth volleyball coach, and I was volunteering with kids. I had my whole life mapped out. I was a girl with a plan, a girl who knew exactly where she was going. But then came the kickback. It was supposed to be a low-key night at a friend's house. I didn't think much of it. I had a small buzzball, shared a joint, and felt a light, comfortable buzz. I'm a hefty gal, I know my limits, and I was nowhere near the point of being incapacitated. But as the night wore on, it got late. I didn't want to risk walking home alone in the dark or paying for an expensive Uber. So, I made the decision that haunts me every single day. I decided to stay over. I thought I was being safe. I thought I was being responsible. I woke up in the middle of the night to a nightmare. I was being assaulted in my sleep by a man I thought was a friend. A 22-year-old who had no job, no car, no goals, and apparently no conscience. I didn't give him signals. I didn't consent. I was unconscious, and he took advantage of that. The moment I realized what was happening, the world turned cold. I left immediately. The next morning, I did what I thought was the right thing. I took a plan B. I blocked him on everything. I deleted him from my life like he was a bad memory I could just erase. I thought I was safe. I thought the pill would do its job and I could go back to my 2 jobs, my volleyball coaching and my dreams. Months went by. My life stayed busy. I didn't get a baby bump. I didn't have morning sickness. I didn't feel kicks. I was living my life, working my shifts, and moving toward my goals. It's what they call a cryptic pregnancy. My body just hid it. I didn't even know I was carrying a human being until the moment he was practically ready to enter the world. A month ago, I gave birth to a beautiful baby boy. And from the second I held him, I knew I would do anything to protect him. Anything. The father? He's still exactly who he was that night. He's 22, still living with his elderly dad and his grandmother. He's never held a job. He doesn't even have a driver's permit, let alone a license or a car. He didn't finish high school and has 0 aspirations to be anything more than a burden on the people around him. He is a predator who preys on younger women, and I was just another one of his targets. When my son was born, I made a choice. I didn't put his name on the birth certificate. I didn't call him. I didn't tell him he had a son. In my mind, a man who starts a child's life with an act of violence doesn't deserve the title of father. I planned to tell my son that I didn't know who his father was, that he was just a miracle that happened during a cryptic pregnancy. I thought that by lying, I was protecting him. I'd rather him think I was irresponsible or fast than have him carry the crushing weight of knowing he was conceived in a moment of trauma. But then I told a couple of my friends. They're childless, and they see the world in black and white. They started telling me that I'm being selfish. They said, the baby deserves to know his father, and he has a right to know he has a son. They looked at me like I was the villain of the story. They made me second guess everything. Am I being blind? Am I letting my own trauma rob my son of a family? Or am I the only one who sees that bringing this man into our lives wouldn't be giving my son a father? It would be giving him a life of disappointment and danger. I live in a conservative state. If I press charges, they'll blame me. They'll ask what I was wearing, why I was drinking, why I stayed over. And if I do go through with a legal battle, it requires a DNA test. That DNA test would alert him to my son's existence. It would give a man who has nothing to lose a permanent tether to me and my child. I can't let that happen. My support system is strong. My family is amazing. My best friend of 10 years is ready to be the best godmother on the planet. And I have another friend who's a teen mom and understands the struggle. I have a village. But is a village enough when the world is telling you that you're the asshole for keeping a secret that's meant to save your child's soul? I've been sitting in the dark, watching my son breathe, wondering if I'm doing the right thing. My friends' words keep echoing in my head. They think I'm being immature. They think I'm being spiteful. But they weren't there that night. They didn't feel the betrayal. They don't see the man for who he really is. A jobless, goalless bum who thinks he can take whatever he wants without consequence. I'm 18 now, and I'm a mother. I have to be the adult. But how do I navigate a world where the right thing feels like the most dangerous thing I could possibly do? The day I found out I was pregnant wasn't in a doctor's office with a little blue line on a stick and a sense of growing anticipation. It was a day of pure, unadulterated terror. Imagine living your life, working 40 hours a week between 2 jobs, coaching volleyball, planning your future, and thinking you've successfully moved past the worst night of your life, only to have that night come roaring back in the most physical way possible. For months, my body had been a vault. It kept the secret so well that even I didn't know what was happening inside me. I didn't have the classic symptoms. I didn't have the cravings or the morning sickness. I was just me. Tired, sure, but I was working 2 jobs and a side hustle. Who wouldn't be tired? When the labor pains started, I thought I was dying. I thought something was catastrophically wrong with my internal organs. I remember the white walls of the emergency room, the smell of antiseptic, and the frantic questions from nurses that I couldn't answer. When the doctor looked at me and told me I was in active labor, the world didn't just stop, it shattered. My first thought wasn't about baby blankets or names, it was about him. It was about that dark room, the smell of stale beer, and the crushing realization that the plan B I had desperately swallowed the morning after had failed me. I felt like my body had betrayed me twice, first by being vulnerable while I slept, and then by hiding the consequence of that night until it was too late to do anything but push. But then, he was there. This tiny 6-pound miracle with a shock of dark hair and fingers that curled instinctively around mine. In an instant, the resentment I expected to feel vanished, replaced by a love so fierce it felt like a physical weight in my chest. He was innocent. He wasn't the product of a crime in my eyes anymore. He was just mine, my son. And as I held him, the protective instinct kicked in with a vengeance. I looked at his perfect face and knew right then that I would lie to the whole world if it meant keeping him safe from the man who had created him. That's when the reality of my friends started to sting. You think you know people until you're in a crisis. These were girls I had grown up with, people I shared my secrets with. But when I told them about the birth and my decision to keep the father out of the picture, their faces didn't show sympathy. They showed judgment. But he's the dad, one of them said, swirling her straw in a soda like she was discussing a plot point in a TV show. Don't you think he has a right to know? Like, legally? And for the baby's sake, doesn't he deserve a father? I wanted to scream. I wanted to grab them by the shoulders and shake them until they understood. A father is someone who protects you. A father is someone who provides. This man? He's a 22-year-old child. He spends his days sitting in his grandmother's house, playing video games, and waiting for someone to hand him a life he hasn't earned. He has no car. He has no permit. He has no high school diploma. He has never worked a day in his life while I've been out there earning since I was 12. But more than that, more than the laziness and the lack of ambition, he is a man who thinks no is a suggestion and asleep is an invitation. How do you explain to friends that the person they're advocating for is a predator? They see a jobless bum as a project, someone who just needs the motivation of a child to turn his life around. They have this cinematic idea in their heads that he'll see his son and suddenly become a provider, get his GED, and buy a minivan. But I know the truth. People like him don't change because they have a kid. They just find a new person to drain. If I let him in, I'm not giving my son a father. I'm giving my son a front row seat to a life of disappointment. I'm giving a rapist legal rights to my child. I'm giving him the power to take my son away for weekends, to drive him around without a license, to expose him to a household where no one has any drive or respect for boundaries. He deserves to know, they kept saying. It felt like a slap in the face. What about what I deserve? What about the peace of mind I've worked so hard for? I spent years building myself up. I took the childcare pathway in school because I love kids. I worked with Head Start. I coached volleyball. I know what children need, and what they need is stability, safety, and love. They don't need a biological tether to a man who will only teach them how to be a victim or a predator. The pressure from them made me feel like I was going crazy. I started questioning my own sanity. Am I just bitter? Am I being the asshole because I'm hurt? I spent late nights staring at the ceiling while my son slept in his bassinet, wondering if I was the one who was being selfish. I live in a state where the laws aren't on my side. If I go to the police now, months later, without a rape kit from that night, they'll tear me apart. They'll look at my buzzball in a joint, and they'll say I asked for it. They'll say I'm a troubled teen mom trying to ruin a man's life. And the moment a DNA test is ordered, he gets rights. He gets to be in my life forever. He gets to see me at drop-offs. He gets to look at me and know that he won. But then I look at my village, the people who actually matter. My best friend of 10 years, she didn't hesitate for a second. When I told her, she didn't ask about him. She asked what I needed. She bought diapers. She showed up at 3 a.m. when I was crying from exhaustion. She's the one who's going to be the godmother. She knows the truth, and she hasn't judged me once. Then there's my other friend, a girl who became a mom at 16. She's been through the fire. She looked me in the eye and said, "Protect your peace. A child is better off with no father than a bad one." That's when I realized that the friends who were judging me didn't actually care about my son. They cared about a concept. They cared about the fairness of a situation that they haven't lived. They've never had to wake up in the dark and realize someone they trusted was violating them. They've never had to figure out how to pay for a baby's life on 2 part-time salaries while being a full-time student. They're playing philosopher with my life, and I'm done letting them. I've made a decision. I'm cutting them off. If you can advocate for a rapist to have access to a child just because of biology, you aren't a friend. You're a liability. I'm moving forward with my son, my family, and my real friends. I'm going to get my license, get my car, and build the life I promised myself when I was 12 years old selling jewelry at the flea market. My son will have everything. He'll have the best education, the best support, and a mother who would walk through fire for him. But there's still that one nagging thought, the lie. I told myself I'd tell him I didn't know who his father was. But is that fair? If I lie, am I just building a house on sand? What happens when he's 15 and takes a 23andMe test? What happens when he finds out I kept the truth from him? I'm starting to realize that maybe the miracle story isn't the right way. Maybe the truth, the hard, ugly, painful truth, is the only way to truly protect him. I don't want him to ever feel the weight of his conception, but I also don't want him to feel the betrayal of a mother who lied to him for 18 years. I'm thinking about the future now, not just the next feeding or the next shift at work, but the day my son asks, "Where's my dad?" And for the first time, I think I know what I'm going to say. It won't be a fairy tale, and it won't be a miracle. It'll be the truth about a man who was weak and a mother who was strong enough to keep him away. The silence that followed blocking those friends was the loudest thing I'd heard in weeks. You'd think that cutting people out would feel like a violent tear, a jagged hole left in your social circle. But for me, it felt like finally taking off a pair of shoes that were 3 sizes too small. I sat on my bed, my phone glowing with the user-blocked notifications. And for the first time since I walked out of that hospital with a car seat in my hand, I felt like I could actually breathe. They didn't understand that their opinion wasn't just a difference in perspective. It was a threat to my son's safety. To them, it was a philosophical debate over coffee. To me, it was a battle for my life and the life of the person I love most. I looked over at my son, sleeping in the bassinet I'd spent my jewelry making money on. I call him my little warrior because of how he fought to be here, hidden away for 9 months, surviving on whatever nutrients I was taking in while working double shifts. Looking at him, I realized that I couldn't afford to have friends who played devil's advocate with my trauma. If they could look at me, the girl they've known for years, and then look at a man who assaulted me, and somehow conclude that he was the one being wronged, well, they were never really my friends to begin with. That night, my best friend, the one who's been by my side for a decade, came over with a bag of takeout and a box of diapers. She didn't ask if I'd changed my mind. She didn't ask if I was sure. She just walked in, saw the look on my face, and said, "You did it, didn't you? You cut them off." When I nodded, she just sat down next to me and started unpacking the food. "Good," she said. "You don't have room for dead weight anymore. You've got a kid to raise and a life to build." That's the difference between a village and a social circle. A social circle is there for the flea markets and the fun nights out. A village is there when you're 18, terrified, and staring down a future you didn't ask for but are determined to win. She's the one who's going to be his godmother. She's the one who was there when I took my first practice drive for my license last week. While the others were talking about rights, she was talking about registration. She was helping me study for my permit test while I rocked a crying infant. But as much as I tried to focus on the positive, the fear of my state's legal system still hung over me like a dark cloud. I live in a place where tradition often trumps truth. I've seen it happen. I've seen girls go to the police with bruises and DNA, only to be asked what they were drinking and why they were out so late. In their eyes, the fact that I had a buzzball and a joint would be enough to dismiss the entire assault. They'd call it a misunderstanding. They'd say I was unreliable. And the worst part? The DNA test. If I tried to get justice, the state would demand a paternity test. And the second that paper came back positive, that man, that jobless, goalless predator, would suddenly have legal standing. He'd have a claim. His grandmother and his elderly father, who probably don't even know I exist, would suddenly want visitation. They'd want to take my son into a house where no one works, where no one has a car, where no one has the drive to be better. They'd bring him into an environment of stagnation and blame. I won't let my son be a pawn in some legal game that ends with him spending weekends in a house with a man who doesn't even respect the word no. So I'm staying quiet. I'm staying under the radar. People might call that robbing a father, but I call it saving a son. However, there was one thing I knew I had to change. I'd originally told myself I'd lie to my son. I thought a cryptic pregnancy miracle story would be easier. I thought I could shield him from the darkness of his origin. But then I talked to my other close friend, the one who had her baby at 16. She's 19 now, and her daughter is starting to ask questions. She told me something that changed my entire outlook.
They find out, she said, her voice steady but sad. They always find out. And if they find out from a DNA test or a random person on the street instead of from you, you lose them forever. You lose the trust you spent a lifetime building.
She was right. If I tell my son his father is a mystery, he'll spend his whole life searching for a ghost. He'll look in every mirror and wonder which half of him is a secret. And when he eventually finds out, because in the age of the internet and DNA kits, everyone finds out, the blow won't just be the truth about his father. The blow will be that his mother, the person he trusted most, lied to him for 18 years. So, I've decided to be brave. I'm not going to lie. I'm not going to give him the full, graphic details when he's 5, obviously. I'm going to wait until he's old enough to understand the complexities of the world. I'm going to consult with a child psychologist to make sure I'm using the right language. But I'm going to tell him that his father was not a good man. I'm going to tell him that his father did something very wrong, and that to keep him safe and happy, I had to make the hardest choice a mother can make. I'll tell him that being a father is a verb, not just a biological coincidence, and that his father didn't earn the right to the title. It's going to be a heavy burden for him to carry, but it's a burden we'll carry together. I'd rather him know he was born from a moment of darkness, but raised in a lifetime of light, than have him believe his whole life is based on a fairy tale I made up to protect myself. Right now, my focus is on the grind. I'm still working my jobs. I'm still saving for that car. Every time I get a paycheck, I put a little bit into a savings account for him. I'm 18 and I'm a mom, and the world might look at me and see a statistic. But when I look in the mirror, I see a woman who survived. I see a woman who took a nightmare and turned it into a beautiful, screaming, hungry little reality. My son is going to have the life I never had. He's going to grow up knowing he is wanted, knowing he is protected, and knowing that his mother is a person who doesn't back down. Not from predators, not from judgmental friends, and not from the hard truths of life. I'm still scared. I'm scared that one day, somehow, that man will find out. I'm scared that the legal system will fail me if he ever tries to force his way in. But for now, it's just me, my baby, and my village. And honestly, that's more than enough. The morning sun usually hits the window of my small room around 6:30 a.m., casting a long golden rectangle across the crib. Most 18-year-olds are probably hitting the snooze button for the 5th time, dreading a 9 a.m. lecture or a shift at a retail job they hate. But for me, that light is the starting gun for a race that never really ends. I've been awake since 4. That's the hour when the house is the quietest, when the only sound is the rhythmic puff of my son's breath and the low hum of the refrigerator. It's also the hour when my mind likes to play back the highlight reel of everything I've lost and everything I'm fighting to keep. People see an 18-year-old with a baby, and they immediately start writing a story for you. They see a statistic. They see someone who messed up. They don't see the girl who started her first business at 12 years old, sitting on a dusty rug at the local flea market, selling hand-wired jewelry to strangers just so she could have a savings account that her family couldn't touch. They don't see the girl who doubled up on credits to graduate high school early because she knew she needed to be in the workforce full-time to survive. They don't see the girl who spent her elective hours in the childcare pathway, not because it was an easy grade, but because she actually cared about the development of young minds. I was prepared for the work of being a mother. I was a youth volleyball coach. I've dealt with screaming kids, demanding parents, and high-pressure situations since I was 15. I volunteered with Head Start, working with 3-year-olds who came from backgrounds so rough it would make your heart bleed. I knew how to change a diaper, how to soothe a colicky cry, and how to track developmental milestones. I had the knowledge. What I wasn't prepared for was the psychological warfare of doing it all while knowing my son's genetic half came from a person who shouldn't be allowed near a playground, let alone a nursery. When I look at my son, I see my eyes. I see my stubborn chin. But sometimes, in the way he shifts in his sleep, or the shape of his hands, I see a ghost. I see the man who thought he could take what he wanted and walk away. That man, let's call him a father only in the strictly biological, dictionary sense, is the definition of a dead end. 22 years old and still living in the same room he grew up in, probably surrounded by the same posters and the same lack of ambition. He's never had a permit. Think about that for a second. At 22, he has never even sat for a written driver's test. He relies on his elderly father and his grandmother to ferry him through a life that he refuses to engage with. He has no high school diploma, no GED, and no intention of getting either. He is a predator who preys on the young because he knows anyone his own age would see right through his misunderstood soul act. He targets girls like me, girls who are focused, driven, and maybe a little too trusting because we haven't been burned yet. He saw my drive, my 2 jobs, and my jewelry business, and he didn't see someone to admire. He saw a host. He saw someone he could lean on, someone who would eventually provide for him. And when I didn't play along, when I kept my boundaries firm, he waited until I was unconscious to force his way into my life forever. Or so he thought. The thing about people like him is they underestimate the power of a woman with a plan. He thinks he's safe because I disappeared and blocked him. He probably thinks he got away with it. And in a way, he did. He's not in a cell. He's not on a registry. He's still sitting in his grandmother's house, probably playing the same video games he was playing the night he changed my life. But what he doesn't know is that he didn't just take something from me. He gave me the one thing that would ensure I never, ever stop running toward my goals. My friends who called me an asshole, they haven't spoken to me in weeks, and the silence is a gift. They keep saying he deserves to know. But let's play that out. Let's say I call him today. Let's say I tell him, hey, you have a son. What happens next? He has no money for child support. He has no way to get to my house to see the baby because he can't drive. He would likely bring his elderly father and grandmother into the mix, people who are already struggling to care for him, and suddenly my son is being passed around a household that smells of cigarettes and stagnation. And then there's the legal side. If I tell him, I give him leverage. In my state, even a man with a history like his can get supervised visitation. He could have the right to know where we live, what school my son goes to, and who I'm dating. He would have a permanent legal tether to my neck, and he would use it to yank me back every time I tried to move forward. He wouldn't do it out of love for the child. He'd do it out of a need for control. My best friend, the one who's been there for 10 years, is the only one who truly gets it. We were sitting on the porch the other night, the baby finally asleep, and she asked me if I ever felt guilty. I thought about it for a long time. I looked at my hands, still stained with a bit of the wire wrapping tarnish from a jewelry order I was finishing up. I feel guilty that I can't give him a normal family, I told her. I feel guilty that his biological father is a monster. But do I feel guilty for keeping that monster away? No. That's the only part of this I don't feel guilty about. She nodded and handed me a cup of tea. The world thinks father is a right, she said, but you and I both know it's an honor. And he didn't just fail to earn it, he forfeited it. That conversation solidified something in me. I'm not just being petty. I'm not being hormonal or blinded by trauma. I am being a gatekeeper. I am the wall between my son and a man who would only ever bring him down. I'm working on my license now. Every time I get behind the wheel of my best friend's car, I feel a sense of power I can't describe. Each turn, each parallel park, each mile on the odometer is a mile further away from the version of me that was a victim. I'm saving for a car, something reliable, something with a high safety rating. I'm still working my 2 jobs, and my jewelry business is actually picking up because I've started selling online instead of just at the markets. I've also started doing something I never thought I'd do. I'm writing letters to my son. I have a leather-bound notebook hidden in my top drawer. In it, I'm documenting everything. I'm writing about my jewelry business, about my volleyball coaching, about the way his eyes light up when I sing to him. But I'm also writing the truth about his father. I'm writing it now while it's fresh, so that when the day comes for us to have that conversation, I won't be speaking from a place of raw, unhealed pain. I'll be speaking from a place of history. I want him to know that I didn't make this choice lightly. I want him to know that I fought for his peace before he even knew what the word meant. The childless friends are still out there, probably whispering about me at parties, calling me the girl who stole a baby from its dad. Let them talk. They are living in a fairy tale where everyone is redeemable and every dad is a hero in waiting. I live in the real world. In my world, some people are just shadows, and you don't invite shadows into a room full of light. The whistle around my neck felt heavier than usual that Saturday morning. Standing on the sidelines of the volleyball court, watching my girls dive for balls and rotate with clockwork precision, I felt like I was living in 2 different dimensions at once. To the parents in the bleachers, I was just coach, the disciplined 18-year-old who had somehow juggled a pregnancy, a new baby, and a coaching gig without dropping a single ball. They didn't know that every time my phone vibrated in my pocket, my heart skipped a beat, terrified it was a message from a ghost. They didn't know that beneath my coaching whistle was a heart that had been shattered and rebuilt out of sheer, stubborn will. The village I mentioned earlier isn't just a metaphor. It's the only reason I'm still standing. My own mother, a woman who worked 3 jobs to keep our heads above water when I was growing up, looked at my son for the first time and didn't see a mistake. She saw a legacy. She was the one who sat me down when I was spiraling after the birth, crying about how I'd failed my plan for my life. She took my face in her hands and said, "A plan is just a piece of paper, honey. Life is what happens when you're brave enough to keep walking when the paper burns." She hasn't asked me once about the father. She knows the story. She knows the truth. And in our house, his name is a word that is never spoken, not out of fear, but because he doesn't deserve the oxygen it takes to say it. But the world outside our house isn't as protective. A few days ago, I was at the flea market setting up my jewelry display. I still do it because the extra cash goes straight into the escape fund, my savings for a down payment on a small apartment where no one can find us. I was arranging some Labradorite necklaces when I saw a familiar face. It was a guy I'd seen at the kickback that night, a peripheral friend of him. My blood turned to ice. I felt that familiar primal urge to hide, to cover my son's stroller with a blanket, to vanish into the crowd. He didn't see the baby at first. He just walked up, grinning, looking at the jewelry. "Hey, I haven't seen you around in forever," he said, oblivious to the fact that his casual greeting felt like a physical blow. "That guy was asking about you, you know. He said you blocked him on everything. He seemed pretty pissed about it." I felt the air leave my lungs. "I don't care," I managed to say, my voice sounding like it was coming from someone else. I kept my eyes on the necklaces, my fingers trembling as I adjusted a price tag. "Damn, okay," the guy laughed, completely missing the tension. He's still the same, honestly. Still living at his grandma's, still talking about starting some clothing brand that never happens. You didn't miss much. I wanted to scream. I wanted to tell him that I hadn't missed anything. I had survived something. I wanted to tell him that the guy he was talking about, as if he were just a mildly annoying ex, was actually a predator who had left a permanent mark on my soul. But I stayed quiet. I watched him walk away, and as soon as he was out of sight, I pulled my son's stroller closer to me. The realization hit me like a freight train. As long as I live in this town, as long as I breathe the same air as that man, my peace is on a timer. That encounter changed something in me. It made me realize that my judgmental friends weren't just wrong, they were dangerous. If they think he has a right to know, they might be the ones to provide him with the link. They might be the ones to point him in my direction at a market or tell him which park I coach at. I realized that my circle didn't just need to be smaller. It needed to be a fortress. That night, I went back to the leather-bound notebook. I wrote a letter to my son about that day. I told him how I felt when I saw that man's friend. I told him that I wasn't hiding because I was ashamed of him, but because I was guarding his light. I wrote about the clothing brand comment, a pathetic detail that highlighted the vast chasm between the life I'm building and the stagnation of the man who shares his DNA. I want my son to know that his mother was working 2 jobs, coaching a team, and running a business, while his biological father couldn't even manage to get a driver's license. I'm also starting to look into child psychologists. I know, it sounds crazy for an 18-year-old to be thinking about therapy for a 1-month-old, but it's not for him. Not yet. It's for me. I need to know how to navigate the coming years. How do I explain a father who is a criminal without making my son feel like he's half criminal? How do I build his self-esteem when the truth of his conception is so dark? I spent an hour on the phone with a specialist in trauma-informed parenting. She told me something I'll never forget. Children don't need a perfect story. They need a consistent one. They need to know that they were the best thing to come out of a bad situation. That gave me a sense of peace I haven't had in a long time. It reinforced my decision to be honest eventually, but also my decision to keep the gates locked for now. And then came the big milestone. Yesterday, I walked into the DMV. My hands were sweating, and I'd had about 4 hours of sleep, but I was ready. I sat in that plastic chair, took the test, and when the woman behind the glass told me I'd passed, I almost burst into tears right there. To anyone else, it's just a plastic card. To me, it's a getaway vehicle. It's the ability to take my son to the doctor without asking for a ride. It's the ability to move to a different city, a different state, a different life. I'm no longer the 17-year-old girl who stayed at a kickback because she was afraid of an expensive Uber. I am an 18-year-old mother with a license, a business, and a village that would go to war for me. My friends, the ones who said I was the asshole, they're still out there, living their consequence-free lives. They're probably at some party right now, talking about how sad it is that I'm so bitter. They have no idea that bitterness is a luxury I can't afford. I don't have time to be bitter. I only have time to be better. I have a son who deserves a mother who is whole, not a mother who is constantly looking over her shoulder. I know the road ahead is going to be brutal. There will be days when the money is tight, days when the baby is sick, and days when the memory of that night feels like it's drowning me. But then I'll look at my license, I'll look at my jewelry orders, and I'll look at my son's sleeping face. And I'll know that every boundary I've set, every bridge I've burned, and every secret I've kept has been for a reason. I'm not the asshole for protecting my child from a predator. I'm the hero of his story, and eventually, he's going to know that too. There's a specific kind of exhaustion that doesn't just live in your muscles. It lives in your bones, in the very way you breathe. It's the exhaustion of being 18 and living 3 different lives at once. By day, I'm the professional, the volleyball coach standing tall on the court, the employee balancing the books at my 2 jobs, the entrepreneur meticulously wrapping semi-precious stones in copper wire until my fingertips are raw. By night, I'm the protector, the mother who wakes up at the slightest whimper, the woman who checks the locks on her doors 3 times before she can even think about closing her eyes. And in the quiet spaces in between, I'm still that 17-year-old girl, trying to process a trauma that the world tells me I should just get over, for the sake of a man who doesn't even know his own son exists. The jewelry business has become my sanctuary. There's something therapeutic about taking a piece of cold, hard wire and forcing it to bend to your will. You have to be firm but gentle. If you pull too hard, the wire snaps. If you don't pull hard enough, the stone falls out. It's a lot like my life right now. I'm trying to craft something beautiful out of the hardest materials imaginable. I started selling more online, and every time that notification pings on my phone, a sale, a 5-star review, a message from a customer saying they love my work, it feels like a brick being laid in the foundation of my freedom. That money isn't for clothes or makeup. It's for the escape fund. Because the more I think about it, the more I realize that staying in this town is like trying to heal while the person who wounded you is still holding the knife. But then, the digital world reminded me that you can't ever truly block out the past. It happened on a Tuesday while I was nursing the baby and scrolling through my phone during a rare moment of stillness. I opened a social media app, one I rarely use anymore, and there it was, under People You May Know. My heart didn't just beat, it hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. His face, that smug, vacant expression I hadn't seen in months. He was staring back at me through a blurry selfie, probably taken in his grandmother's bathroom. The algorithm, in its infinite, unfeeling wisdom, saw our mutual friends, our shared location, and our history, and decided we should connect. I felt a wave of nausea so intense I had to set the baby down in his bassinet. I felt exposed, like he was looking through the screen, through the walls of my house, straight at the child he has no right to claim. I clicked on the profile, a mistake, I know, but I couldn't stop myself. It was exactly what I expected. Posts about the grind when he hasn't worked a day in his life. Memes about loyalty from a man who doesn't know the meaning of the word. And then a post from just 2 days ago. Looking for a real one to hold it down, tired of these girls playing games. I almost laughed, but it came out as a sob. Playing games. That's what he thinks happened. He thinks I played a game by blocking him. He has no idea that while he's posturing on the internet, looking for his next victim, I am raising a human being. I am working 60 hours a week. I am building a future while he is rotting in the past. But the fear stayed. If the algorithm could find me, how long until he did? How long until one of those friends I cut off mentions my son's name in a comment section? How long until he realizes that the girl he assaulted didn't just disappear? She transformed. I called my best friend, my voice shaking. She was at my door in 10 minutes. She didn't even say hello. She just took the baby from my arms, saw the look on my face, and knew. When I showed her the screen, she didn't mince words. He's a ghost, honey. And ghosts can only haunt you if you let them in the house. You're moving, remember? We're getting you out of here. She's right. The move isn't just a dream anymore. It's a necessity. I've been looking at small apartments 2 towns over, close enough to keep my coaching job, but far enough that I don't have to worry about running into his friends at the flea market. I need a place where I can walk my son in a stroller without feeling like I'm wearing a target on my back. But as I plan this escape, the weight of the friends' judgment still lingers. They keep saying I'm robbing my son of a father. They talk about the father-shaped hole in a child's heart. But what about the predator-shaped hole in a mother's life? Why is it that the father's right to a child is always placed above the child's right to a safe, stable, and trauma-free environment? My son doesn't have a hole in his heart. He has a mother who loves him enough to be both parents. He has a grandmother who dotes on him. He has a godmother who would move mountains for him. He has a village. If a father is just a person who provides sperm and then spends the next 20 years being a burden, then my son is better off without one. I've seen what happens to kids who grow up watching their mothers be disrespected. I've seen what happens to boys who are raised by men who think women are objects to be taken. I won't let that be my son's normal. I won't let him grow up thinking that his father's laziness and violence are things to be excused or emulated. I've started looking into the legalities of abandonment. In my state, if a father isn't on the birth certificate and doesn't provide support or contact for a certain amount of time, his rights can be terminated more easily. Every day that passes in silence is another day of evidence that he isn't a father. He hasn't looked for me. He hasn't tried to make amends. He's just looking for the next real one to hold it down. Yesterday, I took my son to the park. It was the first time I felt brave enough to go to a public place where people might recognize me. I sat on a bench, watching the older kids play, and I realized something. My son is going to grow up in a world that tells him he needs a dad to be whole. And it's my job, my most important job, to make sure he knows that wholeness comes from the character of the people who show up, not the biological markers of the people who didn't. I looked down at him, his little hand wrapped around my thumb, and I whispered a promise. I will tell you the truth. I will keep you safe. And I will never, ever let anyone make you feel like you are less than because of how you got here. I'm 18. I'm a survivor. I'm a business owner. And I am a damn good mother. Those friends can keep their opinions. I'll keep my son. The move didn't happen with a big moving truck or a crew of burly men. It happened in the dead of night, one carload at a time, fueled by lukewarm coffee and the kind of adrenaline that only kicks in when you're running toward a better life. My best friend and my mom were there, of course. We worked like a silent, well-oiled machine, loading my jewelry supplies, the bassinet, the bags of tiny clothes, and my coaching gear into the back of my mom's old SUV. Each trip felt like I was shedding a layer of skin, leaving behind the girl who had been afraid to sleep and becoming the woman who owned the dawn. When I finally turned the key in the lock of my new apartment, a tiny, one-bedroom place 40 minutes away, the air felt different. It didn't smell like the stale memories of my hometown or the lingering anxiety of that kickback. It smelled like fresh floor wax and potential. I stood in the empty living room, holding my son against my chest, and I just let out a breath I feel like I'd been holding for an entire year. For the first time, I didn't feel like a victim living in the shadow of a crime. I felt like a homeowner. Okay, a renter, but in my world, that was the same as owning a castle. The first few weeks were a blur of new. New grocery store, new routes to work, new park for my son. I kept my coaching job, making the drive back twice a week, but the distance gave me a perspective I desperately needed. Every time I drove back toward my old town, I felt like I was visiting a museum of a life I used to live. I'd see the same people at the same gas stations, still stuck in the same cycles, and I'd think about him. He was probably still sitting on that same porch, still waiting for a future to be handed to him on a silver platter, while I was out here building mine, one jewelry order and one volleyball practice at a time. My jewelry business, Resilient Stones, finally took off in a way I hadn't expected. I'd started a TikTok showing the process, the raw wire, the unpolished stones, and the transformation into something strong and beautiful. I didn't tell my full story, but I talked about healing through art. People connected with it. Orders started pouring in from states I'd never even visited. Every time I packaged an order, I felt like I was sending a piece of my strength out into the world. That money wasn't just for rent anymore. It was for a college fund. It was for a lawyer, just in case. It was for the life my son deserved. But with success came a different kind of fear. The more visible I became, the more I worried about being found. I kept my location private, used a P.O. box in a different town, and never showed my son's face. I was living a double life, a successful young creator and coach on the outside, and a guarded, cautious protector on the inside. Then I got a message. Not from him, but from one of those friends I'd blocked. She'd used a burner account to reach out. I saw your jewelry is doing well, she wrote. Glad to see you're finally over everything. Just thought you should know. He is going through a hard time. His grandmother passed away, and he's really struggling. It seems cruel that you're living it up while he's grieving alone. He deserves to know he has family left. I stared at the screen, my hands trembling. Not with fear this time, but with a cold, righteous fury. Living it up? I was working 3 jobs and raising a baby alone at 18. Cruel? Cruelty is what he did to me. And as for his grandmother, I felt a twinge of sadness for her. She was the one who had been enabling him, but she was also a human being. But the idea that her death gave him some right to my son was the most twisted logic I'd ever heard. I didn't reply. I didn't engage. I just hit block again. That was the moment I realized that these people didn't just have bad opinions. They were fundamentally incapable of understanding the weight of what had happened. They saw a sad guy who lost his grandma. I saw a predator who lost his primary enabler and was now looking for a new source of support. They wanted me to be his saving grace. They wanted my son to be his reason to change. But my son is not a rehabilitative tool. He is not a reason for a man to finally grow up. He is a person. He is a child who deserves a life that isn't tethered to someone else's dysfunction. I realized then that my friends didn't value my safety or my son's future. They valued a tidy, happy ending where everyone forgives and forgets. But some things are unforgivable. Some things shouldn't be forgotten. I sat down with my mom that night and we talked about the future. I told her about the message. She didn't even blink. "Honey," she said, "some people are so uncomfortable with the truth that they'd rather you live a lie just so they don't have to feel bad. You keep that door locked. You're doing the work of 2 people, and you're doing it better than most people do with a whole team. Don't let their weakness become your burden." I'm starting to see a child psychologist now, just for myself. We talk about boundaries and inherited trauma. She's helping me find the words I'll eventually use when my son is old enough to ask about his father. We've moved away from the cryptic miracle lie. Instead, we're working on a narrative of strength. Your father was someone I knew, but he wasn't someone who could be a father. He did something that hurt me, and to make sure you grew up safe and happy, I had to make sure we lived our own life. It's not perfect, but it's honest. It honors my experience while protecting his innocence. My son is 6 months old now. He's starting to crawl, a determined little wiggle that carries him across the living room toward whatever shiny object catches his eye. When he reaches his goal, he looks back at me and lets out this high-pitched, toothless giggle that makes my heart feel like it's going to explode. In those moments, I know I made the right choice. Imagine if he were in that other house. Imagine if he were being raised in a place where the air is heavy with what-ifs and if-onlys. Instead, he's here. He's in a home where the music is always playing, where the walls are covered in his finger paintings. Okay, mostly just smudges. And where he is the absolute center of a world built on love and hard work. I look back at that 17-year-old girl at the kickback sometimes. I want to reach through time, grab her by the hand, and tell her that she's going to be okay. I want to tell her that the nightmare isn't the end of her story. It's just the prologue. I want to tell her that she's stronger than she ever imagined, and that one day, she's going to be sitting in her own apartment, watching her son crawl toward a bright, beautiful future that she built with her own 2 hands. To anyone out there who has been told they're the asshole for protecting themselves, let me tell you this. Boundaries aren't an act of hate. They're an act of self-love. You aren't responsible for the redemption of the person who hurt you. You are only responsible for the life you lead and the people you protect. What would you do in my shoes? Would you risk your child's safety for the sake of biological rights? Or would you build a fortress and never look back? Let me know in the comments. Your stories and your support have been my lifeline, and I'm so grateful to have this community behind me. Don't forget to subscribe for more of our journey,